Meanwhile, when it comes to the ongoing war, Blinken says the West's ongoing support of Ukraine is protecting the fundamental values of peace and security.
We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we know that a sovereign and independent Ukraine will endure. And we know that in supporting Ukraine, we're also defending the principles of sovereignty and independence that are foundational to global peace and security.
And for more on this story, Professor Joseph Camilleri from La Trobe University joins us today. Welcome back in. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
So firstly, the two Scandinavian countries here, Sweden and Finland, have pursued neutrality for a long period of time. Why are they changing strategy now, do you think?
Well, I think for two reasons. One, they have seen the war in Ukraine unfold, particularly in recent months, and the public in both countries feels anxious about what might be in store in the Europe of the future. That's one factor. And the second factor has been the extraordinary barrage that has been unleashed in much of the Western media, and that includes very much Sweden and Finland, which has emphasized the terrible things that have happened, and rightly, as a result of military action taken by Russia. And de-emphasized, not so rightly, the factors that led to that decision by Moscow, by President Putin and his advisors. And I think they have, to some extent, well, some considerable extent, let me be frank, have overemphasized the possible threat to either Finland or Sweden. So that said, we should take note of the fact that Sweden over the last 20 or more years, perhaps 30 years, has been moving closer and closer and closer to NATO. So in one sense, this is, if you wish, a next step of a long-term trend that's been going on for some considerable time. Finland a little less so, but Finland too has been getting closer. And if you like, the events of the last 3 months have rushed things along to the state that we're now. Personally, I think it is a very unfortunate step, because one of the greatest contributors to a more peaceful world are those that have maintained policies of non-alignment or neutrality. They create a buffer between those who are adversaries, strategic competitors. And should that happen, should Sweden and Finland decide to join, and should NATO accept them, which looks on the cards at the moment, then that buffer will be so much weaker, it'll be virtually non-existent in Europe, and that might spell trouble. But perhaps that's enough by way of an answer to your question at this time.
Let's focus on what might stand in their way. Turkey is a NATO member, of course, but have expressed their displeasure. Why have they done this, and what can they do to perhaps put a barrier in front of this move?
Well, technically, I'm not saying it's going to happen, technically they could stop it. Any one member of NATO can veto a decision about new members. So technically they have the power to veto. Whether at the end of the day they will veto is maybe thought to be unlikely, but they will exact a very heavy price, all right? There are those, the United States in particular, that are very keen to proceed to this next step. What's the price that Turkey will exact? And I think it'll be threefold. That nothing that's done in terms of new members should hamper its attempt to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. Not in this order of importance. Secondly, it will want to make sure that Sweden and Finland give firm undertaking to discontinue all current support for Kurdish groups that are opposed to the Turkish government and that from time to time in the past have chosen to use force in their resistance to the Turkish presence in Kurdish territory. It has to be ironclad, no compromise on that one. So they have, and thirdly, they want to see how large the checkbooks will be of those who are so keen to admit them. Because they won't want a pretty hefty check to come their way. I'm speaking metaphorically. So once they get all three things, I'm sure they will not be vetoing, but they're going to be very, very tough negotiators. They want things, and they're now in a kind of position when they can lay down their terms for eventual membership by these two countries.
Professor, just finally, what does all of this latest development tell us about the war so far, and more importantly about the state of Russia-US relations at the moment?
Well, I'm afraid it's not very pleasant, not at all pleasant. My assessment is that the relationship, particularly between Russia and the United States, is at its lowest ebb since the 1940s. That is to say, it is worse, perhaps, than it was even at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The fact of the matter is that these two nuclear superpowers, who between them command 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, 5% of which would be enough, were they ever to be used, to put an end to the planet as we've known it, are closer to miscalculation than they've been for some very considerable time. And the Ukraine is really a kind of proxy war that both are trying to use to shift the balance to their advantage. And sometimes you make mistakes along the way and you drive too far, you push too hard, and there is backlash, there is blowback. And that's the danger we presently face. And Ukraine is only one symptom of this deeper ailment, if I can put it that way. And the sooner we start thinking about it, ending hostilities in the Ukraine, and then trying to mend the relationship between Russia or the United States and the United States. And if we don't, we won't really be able to sleep very soundly at night, I'm afraid.
Concerning words, we'll see what takes place. Professor Joseph Camilleri, always appreciate your time and insight.
Thank you.